we will get going. It's a little bit after 7 here, so welcome everybody. This is the September meeting of the Kingfield Neighborhood Association Board of Directors. We'll be going through an agenda today. That agenda has been posted in the chat. So Frank, if you wanted to jump on there and see what we are going to be talking about and the order that we are going to be talking about it in, that is where that will be accessible. So I will just quickly say kind of the two main things we're going to be going through today are a discussion of community safety and what community safety means as kind of a kickoff of broader community safety conversations in the neighborhood. And then thinking about Neighborhoods 2020, which is a discussion we've been having for a while, as it has been an initiative by the city that has been happening for a while. And thinking there's been some work that's been happening, and Sarah Cheetah will be kind of leading us through that discussion with some actionable steps, hopefully that we'll be able to take around voting on either joining a letter that is currently out there or modifying letter, writing a different letter, however whatever conclusion we come to there. So since we do have a community member here, and we probably should do it anyway anytime, it would be great if we went around and did introductions. So I will start. Chris Drosch, I am the board president, and I live on the 4400 block of Grand. And maybe if we could call on somebody after you're done giving your introduction. So I will call on Sarah Cheetah.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Cheetah. I am the board vice president and I live on 36th and Pillsbury. I'll call on Chris H.
Hi, I'm Chris. I am a board member since November or December of last year. And I live on 36th and First Avenue. And I'm gonna call on Alice.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Hi, I'm Alice Johnson. I live on the 4300 block of Grand Avenue, and I've been a board member for a little over a year. I'm going to call on Becky.
Hi, I'm Becky. I've been a board member since, I guess, December. Maybe it was later than that. Anyway, I'm on the 4000 block of Garfield. Oh, I will call on Derek.
Hi, I'm Derek Holt. I've been a board member for maybe a year this spring time. About a year probably. And I live on the block of 40th and Pleasant. I'll call on David.
I'm David Robbins. I live on the 4400 block of Wentworth, and I've been on the board for almost 2 years now. And I will call on BJ.
Hi everyone, I'm BJ Titus. I live on the 3800 block of First Avenue, and I am the secretary. I will call on Clean Shaven Mike.
Thank you for noticing. My name is Mike, and I am a board member. I've been a member since I think October of 2018. And I will call on, is there anyone left? Frank, have you gone?
Frank, if you are trying to talk, I think you might still be on mute. If you're not trying to talk, it's working.
Are you there?
Oh, there you go. We got you now.
Hello?
Yeah.
Frank Slade, and I live at 3700 First Avenue South.
Great. Thank you. I think that was everybody. Sarah, can you quickly do an introduction?
Sure, you bet. Sarah Linus Robinson. I serve the Community and the Neighborhood Association as the executive director. I office out of 3537 Nicollet, just north of the U-Haul. And for those who've been in the neighborhood lately, had officed out of 38th and Pleasant for the last 20 plus years, which is newly also clean shaven with the bread oven gone and all the trees. So it's been a hard week for me in Kingfield.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for the introductions. We will jump quickly into the community forum section. Frank, since you are the community member that we have here right now, this is kind of an opportunity to discuss, present, ask questions to the board for community members. We do have fairly open meetings, so the agenda that you will see, we would ask and really encourage you to participate in. So I'm sure you'll be able to share kind of your ideas and why you're here and how you want to get involved through that too. But if there's anything you wanted to say at the top of the meeting, this would be a great opportunity to do that. So I will maybe open it up to you if you do have something that you'd like to say, or maybe even if you just wanted to let us know that you're good, that would be good too. So. And you might still be, if you are trying to say anything, you might still be on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear
Perfect.
you.
All right, so I guess I really became really involved in the neighborhood through the Kingfield next door, and then the Facebook page since the looting and the rioting began. So I kind of headed up, if you saw some of my posts, look back, I headed up the, the evening night watches through that whole thing and became really concerned about the direction that we were headed as a city and a neighborhood. My main concern was safety, and the safety of our businesses, are the safety of our neighborhood, and my neighbors, really. And I became really involved with getting to know my neighbors and getting more and more involved, both on Facebook and through Nextdoor. And I just kind of want to get an actual, feel for what the direction of the neighborhood is headed. I also spearheaded, both on Nextdoor and Facebook, a whistle campaign, asking residents to carry a whistle when they're in danger, to blow it, or if they feel unsafe. It's kind of a safety measure to kind of get them to where they're comfortable, because people are not going out because of COVID and whatever reason. And then the crime in our area has just jumped ridiculous since I've been moved in. I moved into my, I live in a duplex on the corner, and 75 to 80%, there weren't any issues that I was concerned about, because I was very, very comfortable in my neighborhood. I love Kingfield, but since the looting and the rioting, I'm more on edge, and so are my neighbors. And so working together to find solutions and how we can, kind of compound safety, being, situationally aware of, what's going on in the neighborhood constantly about, and then also, partnering with some of the businesses and neighbors with how we can, kind of come together and work on solutions to kind of minimize and mitigate where we're seeing a lapse in, community protection from MPD. So that's kind of where I felt like and getting more involved with, the campaigns, the voting, and that kind of regular community involvement was my part of it, on top of the, the election and the criminal element. So that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Well, I guess thank you for that, and thank you for your participation and involvement, and even just being here tonight. I think this is and I'm sure you chose this meeting purposefully, and I think this is going to be a good, if you're willing to stay, and I think we have our kind of discussion around community safety at more of the front end of this meeting.
For sure.
We would love to have you, and we'd love to have you kind of engaged in that. This is although the board has been discussing community safety now for a long time, even before the murder of George Floyd and some of the incidents that you alluded to, we've been talking about community safety and how to think about policing and community safety, both in Kingfield and as a city at large, for a while. And so I think this has only made that acutely more necessary, and I am personally excited to be kind of using this as a kickoff to envision community safety in Kingfield from a board level, from an organizational level, and then how the broader community, how the residents think about community safety, and how we can be leaders both in our community and in the city at large in envisioning that system. So this will be a kickoff. It's going to be kind of high level, but if there is anything specific that you wanted to discuss in terms of specific like community safety, crime things, I would really encourage you to either reach out to myself or Sarah Linus Robinson. I'm sure she can post her email address in the chat. And we can kind of talk more specifically about maybe some of those issues that you would be concerned about. So.
Okay, and also, are you guys addressing National Night Out at all? I didn't see that on the agenda.
Yeah, we've been discussing National Night Out. I think we are, I don't know if we're going to be discussing that specifically tonight, but we have our executive committee, and at our last meeting, we discussed a little bit moving forward with National Night Out. It is my goal, without having discussed this more broadly with the board, to have the organization put out a kind of a statement around National Night Out, both in terms of our understanding of the complexities of gatherings with people and our understandings of the complexities of National Night Out, the history of National Night Out, and its relationship to policing, MPD, community safety, and some opportunities that may lie in those complexities. So I don't know if we're going to discuss it specifically tonight. I think it might be something that we can bring up in the community safety portion of, or the community, safety portion of the meeting. But if there are things that you would like to discuss around National Night Out, again, I would encourage you to either reach out to myself and Sarah, and we can discuss that broadly, but do expect that there will be a statement, and I'll say guidance from the board around what we're thinking about National Night Out. So sorry, that was a long answer to a short question.
Got it.
Great. Well, unless there's anything else, as board members, you are all community members. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? We are going to kind of do the the rollout at the end of the meeting too. But if there's anything anyone would like to discuss now, I will open that up for. I will just briefly, if anyone wants to jump in. Okay. It looks like we do have a quorum, so that is good. Thank you for being here. And could I get, I'll do the call to order. I think I'm supposed to say that officially, and we will move. Could I get a motion to move the consent agenda? I will note that it includes this board meeting agenda, the last August board meeting minutes, some committee and project report updates, and one specific Kieran's business recognition letter and note that was written by Sarah that I think is worth reading, that we will be sharing with Kieran's in the neighborhood more broadly. This is something that I think the executive committee asked for, and that I was excited to be able to present to them after seeing the work that they've put into the community over the years, and also just Dennis's presentation at the redevelopment, in terms of the redevelopment of his parcel of land in the community. So I would encourage you to go read that. But if I could get someone to make a motion to approve those items.
I move to approve.
We also need a second, if that's okay.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? And abstentions? Okay. Thank you very much. And I know you were probably going to do it anyway, Sarah, and I know it's already what we discussed, but if we could just get that note to Dennis, and maybe also maybe send that out via our communication channels around that note for Kieran's, that would be great. Okay, moving on to board vacancy. A few weeks ago, I think it was a few weeks ago, sometime in between our last board meeting and this board meeting, Christina let us know that she will be resigning and is going to need to step down from the board. She has had some health news over the last month that she let us know about, and that was going to impact her ability to serve on the board and her focus in being able to kind of continue to participate. So she has officially stepped down. So now we do have 12 board members. What that means is that we will be starting a process for both recruiting board members, a new board member, and seeking a new board member, recruiting a new board member, and advertising that spot is open. We currently usually we have a couple spots on the back end of the board of people who I think we call them alternates, who would slide into vacant positions. We've reached out to the 2 alternates that we do have right now, it was 1/2 that we had, and they are not interested in the position at the time. So that means we're going to be going through a recruiting process, which I think is an exciting opportunity for us to continue to do outreach in the community and continue to seek new board members. So Sarah, could you maybe just talk a little bit about that process, or if there is anything that I missed about what we need to do in terms of the bylaws for new board members, or for a new board member?
No, so Christina's seat was offered to our one alternate who turned it down. And so at any point, someone can be seated immediately by the board. They don't have to go through an election or be an alternate. So when a candidate comes forward, they can be placed on at any board meeting and be instantly active, is how it works. We don't have a date for the annual meeting yet. So depending on when that is, the person would they'd fill the seat that they'd fill for 1.5 years. They'd fill the remainder of Christina's seat and not need to go through a board election.
Okay, great. And I think this is something that the executive committee, with input of all of you, obviously, will be discussing here shortly on how we move forward with that recruitment process. And Frank, I did just see that you had posted that you're interested. That is great. And we would love to have you kind of engage in the process. I do know we have some other folks who have come to previous board meetings who are also interested. And so we're going to be kind of defining what that process is and putting it out there. And we would love to have you engage. Thank you for coming, and we'll look forward to kind of figuring that out. So if there are any board members who have input into that process or any ideas, please let us know. And we are going to be asking board members to, be putting this communication out and helping kind of boost that communication to the neighborhood. So is there anything else on that or any questions? I guess I should just say, Christina, in her time on the board, was, this has been a really challenging time on the board, as all of you know, and was a really strong participant and added a lot to the board on her time that was here. I know she's not here, but I've communicated that to her, and I know the executive committee and Sarah Chita and Sarah LR both have communicated that to her. So I would encourage you to reach out to her and tell her thanks and tell her good luck. And we appreciate everything that she had done and her participation on the board and her service to the neighborhood. So I will leave it there unless anyone else has any questions or comments. Yes, Sarah.
If I can just add, so most of you came on fairly recent, so you may remember the list of questions that we submitted, which were questions about the community and what people hope to accomplish on the board. I didn't hear anyone from this group say they wanted to be involved in reviewing those questions, so I'm going to assume that will go to the executive committee. But I did want to say that if anybody else really wants to review that application form, just let me know and I will get that to you before the executive committee meets next week. I think we meet a week from now on Wednesday, just to sort of do a recap of the meeting. So I'm happy to send that out and just take your comments via email.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else have any comments or questions in regards to Christina's stepping down or the board vacancy? And I'll just say thank you to David again for writing bylaws that now make more sense when we don't have a complete board. So now we understand if we have quorum or not, which is a great thing. So this kind of instance is the reason why we went through that big review whenever we went through it. So again, thank you, and I feel like we're better as an organization because we went through that. So we'll move on and jump to the community safety portion. We are going to break into small groups. If you look on the agenda, I have written kind of just a very quick kind of front end to this discussion, what we're going to be doing in the framing. We have been hearing both, I think Sarah has been hearing a lot of it, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard a lot of it, and as Frank mentioned in the community forum section of the meeting, there is a big interest, concern around community safety. I think that comes from a lot of different angles and a lot of different perspectives. What I want to make sure that we are grounding our discussion in is community safety. We know that neighborhood organizations have played a role in crime prevention, which has oftentimes not had the impact that it intended to do, and has often been harmful to neighbors in our community, especially brown and black people in our neighborhood. We know that neighborhood organizations have acted as crime prevention groups and have acted as white flight prevention organizations in the past, and that is not, I guess I won't speak for all of you, but that is not the intention of me with this board, and is not the direction that I would like to see us go. I would like to see us be leaders in the community in terms of ensuring that everyone in our community is safe and feels safe and is comfortable, and feels comfortable not only from crime, but feels comfortable being here and being a part of our community. And so I think framing this conversation around community safety, both in the context of the murder of George Floyd and the context in the increased perception of crime that is happening both in our community and more broadly across the city, I think are how we should be thinking about this, both holistically and long term. And so this is a conversation that I want to kick off, and I think the executive committee wants to kick off based on our meeting this month, to have a broader conversation with the community around what community safety means and how we get community members involved in that conversation and active in creating a community, creating space that everyone feels safe and is safe. And so that's the goal of this conversation, is to define what community safety means to us, as individuals, as an organization, and as a city. And so our goal after this conversation is going to be bring this more broadly to the community, and then start, at least in my kind of mind, is then start piecing off those pieces that we define to be community safety, to get residents involved in those. So is community safety knowing your neighbors and knowing that there is someone to call if something happens? Well, let's pull in community members, let's pull in board members to start an initiative to make that happen. Is community safety, feeling, safe being out at restaurants or being able to walk in the neighborhood? Let's start thinking about that. Is community safety knowing that your neighbor is not going to be, harassed or harmed or murdered or killed by Minneapolis police officers, and that's another part of this discussion. And so I want to be able to frame what community safety means. I think I would hope we all want to frame what community safety means, and then start acting on that. So again, I'll say that's the goal of this discussion. I had a nice 3 paragraphs written up that I didn't read, but I think that's pretty much what it says. So I've kind of framed 3 questions, but like I said, we're really trying to answer what community safety means to us. How can KFNA support those things that we define as safety and community safety in our neighborhood? And who, a big thing, part of this is, as we move this into a next phase of engaging with the community, who are those who aren't at this table, aren't typically engaged with, or haven't historically been engaged with on these incredibly important conversations that we should be proactively seeking out to be involved in these conversations. And I think that would be a directive from the board to the group that's leading this and staff to make sure that we are actively engaging with and seeking the input and involving directly in these conversations and these discussions. So I guess I will stop talking. Is there any other input, questions, ideas in that before we break off into groups? On that?
Yeah, that's me, Mike, and Becky. Do either of you want to report out? Becky's shaking her head no.
You've got the notes if you want to lead it. It was fairly similar to those. So, I mean, just kind of probably building on what Christina had mentioned. Well, we talked a little bit about, what Christina, what you were saying is, I mean, police and having like a document of record is so like infused and tied to everything else that you need to go through in order to be able to report like collateral damages or anything that happens like to your property and so forth. We talked a little bit about the difference between like what is public safety versus what is criminality. And you know, how our discussions build around that, you know, all people in the community would feel comfortable being able to join. And really many of the elements of that would be considered criminal elements come from a lack of access to different resources within the community. What would you add to that, Sarah? From having the notes there.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that we talked about perceptions of crimes like maybe muggings or vandalism or theft or things like that versus you know, what's actually going on and wondering if it has increased or if it's just we're hearing more about it. We talked about in terms of the second question here, how KFNA can support affordable housing, can support access to care and resources, mental health resources, people to help manage and navigate systems. We also just acknowledged that I think KFNA as an organization has a big opportunity and responsibility to really like set the tone, to guide and facilitate conversations, and to kind of set a standard for what we're talking about in regards to community safety, and that we are acknowledging it more holistically and acknowledging that it looks different for a lot of different people, making sure that we're including racism as a part of in its relation to safety, both in terms of how that plays out via MPD and the police department and how we as individuals police each other, sometimes based on race, and just that our safety can look very different from one person to another, oftentimes depending on our identities. Let's see what else we talked about. Is there a place for us to set up community forums, surveys, to be able to provide a space to people to connect with one another? Because I think that connection, we talked about just people feeling isolated, people feeling powerless, and how connections with people and knowing neighbors can help combat that. We, in terms of the third question, just who might be most impacted but's underrepresented, been left out, talked about people who are living in parks right now and thinking about, you know, what does community safety mean when you're living in a tent and you don't have basic needs met and you don't have a lock, you don't have a door, you don't have a lock on that door. And so, yeah. Becky, anything to add?
Cool. Thank you so much, guys. I'll maybe take our group and then please jump in, other members. So we talked kind of the first part of our conversation, talking a lot about what community safety means, thinking about it in terms of physical safety, you know, the feeling safe, feeling like you are able to go out in the community, and that you are safe when you do that. I think an acute, I think this is something, you know, Frank conveyed, and I don't want to speak for you, Frank, but, you know, like a really strong empathy for other community members and other businesses who aren't feeling that safety right now, and how we as a community and as an organization can kind of rebuild that sense of community. I think one of the things that Frank has done and that he mentioned, I think it is remarks in the community forum, were kind of the whistle campaign. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about that is it's what that does is it brings, if there is an acute issue around safety happening, it brings community members to assist and respond to that acute issue around safety. I think that there's a really interesting model of following that, but thinking about it before crime or other safety issues happen, and thinking about how we as an organization can create like a whistle campaign, but for those in our community who are at most need, who are forced into the situations of having to break into a garage, have chemical dependence issues, have mental health issues. How can we as an organization create those whistles that the community can then step in and respond to those challenges that both individuals or more the neighborhood is having more broadly. And so I thought that was a really interesting kind of way to think about it. We talked about policing and the impact police have. We talked about kind of bridging. This is something David talks a lot about, is bridging the gap between kind of community members and police, and kind of understanding how community feels about police and how police feel about community, and catching people that fall through the cracks, kind of responding to my other point. How KFNA can support that. I think the whistle campaign that Frank brought up previously, identifying those that are in need, thinking about getting to know neighbors, you know, a kind of I always think about neighborhood watch as more of, when we talked about this in terms of COVID and after the murder of George Floyd, neighborhood watch is watching out for your neighbors. It's getting to know your neighbors and watching out for them. And we also talked about kind of conversations with neighbors. I think another big part of this that KFNA can have is creating the space and the place for community members to connect with each other, just as we did after the murder of George Floyd, with help from other community members, and just as we have done around some of the COVID connections. One of the interesting things that came out of people to engage with further on this was elected officials, specifically Councilmember Jenkins in our ward here, and then businesses, and thinking about the impact that everything that's going on is having on individual businesses, and ensuring that they are engaged with. So BJ, Frank, David, is there anything that I missed or you would like to add or refute that I said wrong? Good. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for that. I think that was the last group, or we were the last group. So what we're going to be doing is we'll have these notes written up, and then I think hopefully at the next board meeting we will the executive committee is going to be kind of talking more about this. And then, so if there's anyone that wants to get further involved in thinking about, how we continue to engage the community on this discussion and execute on all of the things that we just laid out in those, kind of what community safety means to us, please, we need all of you to be involved in that process, because this is a big thing. I don't need to say that more than once, but like it's important, and it needs everyone's help and lift and role and skills in the areas that you feel most comfortable in and want to work in. So please know that we're going to be continuing to reach out and ask, and we'll be coming back with maybe some recommendations on what this program looks like going forward. So anything else anyone would like to add or close or comment on that discussion? Great. I will move it over to Sarah, who's going to kick off our Neighborhoods 2020 discussion. And we are exactly on time, 1 minute late, but doing good. So Sarah, I will move it to you.
Okay, thanks. I will try to keep us on time here. So I just added a link to the Neighborhoods 2020 folder here in the chat. It's also on the agenda. There's 4 documents that are included in that folder. The first one is a memo that outlines basically what I'm asking or proposing for tonight. It gives a little bit of context on Neighborhoods 2020, which, as you know, is an initiative and engagement and proposal through the city of Minneapolis. It gives the funding letter as well. This is the letter that was created with a few different neighborhoods throughout the city, in which all neighborhood organizations have been approached with the opportunity to sign on. The third document there is, sorry, this is changing a little bit as people are opening things. There's some talking points here that give additional context about Neighborhoods 2020, some talking points, kind of a distilled version of the context. And then the last document here is an institutional ally letter that was created basically to ask different businesses, places of worship, elected officials who might, like the park board or school board members who might be in support of neighborhood organizations and who might want to contact the Minneapolis City Council to advocate on behalf of neighborhood organizations and future funding. So all the documents are there for you to take a look at. In the memo, the first document, you'll see, so there's a lot of different opportunities to provide public comments to the city. So one of the ways is for us to sign on to this collective letter. But we also have the opportunity, if we as an organization would want to write a separate letter that maybe builds on or adds some additional points or takes a different approach than this collective letter that's been drafted. Each one of us as residents, as neighborhood organization board members, we can also provide our own comment to the city. We can also encourage our neighbors to sign on, and again, institutional allies as well. This next part here, there are several documents to go take a look at from the City of Minneapolis webpage, so you can see the different proposals, the different engagement process, the revised program guidelines, which were put out in February 2020, and then Cura's racial equity analysis of Neighborhoods 2020. Cura was hired by the city as kind of a facilitator consultant on this most recent process. Let's see, what else can I share? You can also see a list of the neighborhood organizations who have already signed on to the letter. So we've got Elliott Park, Loring Park, Armitage, Victory, St. Anthony, Falwell, Northside Residents Redevelopment Council, East Harriet, Whittier, Tangletown, and Linden Hills. I think more people are going to be voting this week and next, either by e-vote or at their in-person meetings. And the goal is to send the letter to the city by September 16th. So next week. And the final deadline for comment is September 30th. So if you take a look at the letter, basically what it's asking of the city is more funding to do racial equity work. So more funding that would be added to the base funding of what is currently being proposed for neighborhoods, which is based on a racial equity framework that Kira and the city had put together. I am going to pause right there and see if there's any sort of questions, because I know this has been a long process, I think, and there's been several different proposals. But basically the letter is in support of a racial equity funding formula and asking for the city to fund neighborhoods at an additional $3.1 million in order to be able to raise up the base funding of all organizations. So in addition to the base funding, there's also some other buckets of money, if you will, that neighborhoods would be eligible for based on programming, based on partnerships, based on collaborating with other neighborhoods. I think overall, funding is proposed to look different for all neighborhoods. And at this point, this letter is really trying to make the case that neighborhoods are uniquely poised to be responsive to neighbors in a way that maybe that government agencies can't be, and especially in the time of the pandemic, especially in the time of the murder of George Floyd, as we analyze police and kind of who we're looking to as first responders in safety, as well as so who we're looking to, that neighborhoods can really play a role in helping to make healthy and safe neighborhoods for everyone, and to get people connected to various services. And one of the second page there, or the appendix of the letter, gives a list of some current programming, some current initiatives that neighborhoods are taking on and that could be increased, build capacity for with additional funding. And any neighborhood who signs onto the letter, we have the opportunity to add additional programming there, add our organization to any of the areas that we see that align with our initiatives and programming. And so people will be adding information, different neighborhoods will be adding their name and programming just as we connect with more neighborhoods.
Sarah, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So what this letter is asking is to not change really the funding formula, but is to just, so Cura was working when they were making recommendations within a $3 million funding amount or something like that.
This is like 4.1 million is the current. Yeah.
And so this is really just asking to increase the pot with the same math per neighborhoods, right?
Correct. Yep. Okay. So it would keep the funding formula the same, raise everyone's base funding. And so in the memo here, with the current proposal from the city, KFNA would have a base funding of $19,574. This letter would advocate for KFNA's base funding to move up to $35,614. Now, as Sarah LR noted, KFNA's current base funding is $54,000 approximately per year. Under the new model, our base funding decreases under the current proposal with the advocacy around the sign-on letter. However, there's other pots of money based on equitable engagement and partnerships and collaborations that we would be eligible for to supplement that base funding.
Awesome. So I think the real question for us for tonight is, is I guess one, just to present an update on Neighborhoods 2020, but then to have a discussion around this pretty, I think, a really interesting advocacy item that we can kind of sign on to. My other question, Sarah, too, was, can you just talk a little bit about how you got linked in with this group? Because I think that is, this is the sort of work that I think came out of some of that training. And I think this is a good example of when more of that training does come up eventually, for the board members could get involved in. So.
Yeah, for sure. So there's the group of neighborhoods is included in the letter, but basically how I got connected to them is through, so Cura does a Neighborhoods Now community organizing training, usually twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring. It's a week-long organizing training. It's mainly geared towards people who are either working or serving on the board of neighborhood organizations or want to serve on the board of neighborhood organizations. And then there's certainly a lot of other people that are part of community-based organizations that also take part, but they may not be place-based. There might be, like, there was a group of people that were working at a housing nonprofit when I participated, and so forth. And so basically, through that training, I was able to connect with a lot of other people at neighborhood organizations, and a group, Neighborhoods for Equity, kind of formed out of that to think about Neighborhoods 2020 and what our role is in advocating, because the community organizing training focuses on racial equity, then what is our role in applying that towards both our day-to-day work in neighborhood organizations and then bigger picture to advocacy with the city about the future of funding. Yeah, and so I think each one of those cohorts kind of, there's usually about 30 to 40 people that take part of it, and a lot of times people from the cohorts stay connected and work on different issues together. And I think that they just did an online version of that training a couple weeks ago, and there should be another one in the spring. I haven't heard how the all online training went. It's a long period of online interaction, but yeah, highly recommend it, and I definitely will keep people updated on that.
Any questions in regards to Neighborhoods 2020 or comments in regards to the board's position on this letter?
I have several. So I think I got it. What we're looking for is an increase in base funding, but the metrics, so we'll get 19,000 versus 35,000 roughly, if I had the numbers right. But there will be opportunities for additional investment from the city if we take part in or meet their metrics for inclusionary policies, reaching out partnerships with other programs that are engaged in racial equity. Is that generally right? And then
yep.
So if we increase our pot, right? So if we increase the base pot, is that reducing the pot from these from the other, like the ones you have to qualify for meeting the metrics?
Can you say that again? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, no, I'm being very inarticulate right now. So
no, that's okay. This is like confusing stuff.
If we increase the base for all neighborhood associations, right? Does that then, so we have the must qualify in order to reach this funding, and then the base, right? And this is ostensibly higher and this is lower. So if we increase this base, does it come out of this pocket so that less is going to come, or is it just more is allocated generally to the base, but this pot remains the same?
Yeah. So this letter, so originally when the city decided to do with this funding process, it was a budget neutral directive. Like yep. Neighborhoods have X number of money to work with. That's not changing. Figure it out. Type of thing. This letter says we want an additional $3 million, and that's going to be applied to the base.
Okay.
So it's not taking money out of the different pots, if that makes sense.
Yep.
It's putting more money into the base funding for each organization.
So we're not shifting necessarily the percentage that we automatically qualify for versus the stuff that we have to achieve in order to qualify for. I mean, we get more in the base, but we still have the same. Okay. And then,
can I just comment really? Sorry, I don't mean to cut.
Yeah.
I
No, go ahead.
want to just make sure that this letter is like a proposed letter from neighborhood organizations, right? Like this isn't a thing. Like it's kind of a proposed model, and so like it's pretty much saying, city, you need to supply more money to neighborhood organizations. While there is like an actual proposal on the table, which is that 4.1 million, this group is saying, no, you need to do more, and this is how we would do it. So like, I think the details, like just to jump in, like Frank asked a question about like what other areas are affected by funding. Like this is pretty much neighborhood saying, we just need more money. City, you go figure out, if you want to be budget neutral, you go figure out how you cut $3 million from something else or raise more money or whatever. Just to be that clear, that there's not like two alternate funding proposals out there. This is like this is what certain groups are advocating for. So
yeah. So we're reallocating not from within the neighborhood pot. We're reallocating from elsewhere within the city budget to the neighborhood association.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And then and this is not an indictment of KFNA. We can say like Kenwood or something like that. But the thing that I'm fearful of, I mean, we have segregated neighborhoods in the city, right? And they've been segregated, and I don't know if they're becoming more segregated. I don't actually have the stats on that. But is there reason to believe that, I mean, would it be more equitable? Would it encourage neighborhoods to actually be more equitable and advocate for inclusionary housing, advocate for racial equity within the neighborhoods, if we said rather, and less self-serving potentially, if we say put more money into these aspirational metrics as opposed to in the just automatic pots, you know what I mean? So that, and then that could be just a nebulous thing that neighborhoods could compete for. So if we do a better job at being more inclusionary and advocating for our neighbors vis-a-vis our I hate saying that we're going to compete against other neighborhood associations, but if we engage with a broader spectrum, right, then we have a great partnership with Lindale and Bryant and everything like that. And we create this like great program that degentrifies neighborhoods and creates better opportunities. We get more funding because we're doing more than a neighborhood association like Lowry Hill or something that is whiter and maybe, and if this is going to be online, I apologize to my boss, but maybe isn't engaged in that type of work as much as, because like, how do we attract people to our neighborhood association that will advocate for it, and as opposed to making it easy to get the funding? And I'm not saying it is easy because I understand it's the reduction funding, but how do we encourage the future boards to make this a priority so that we get more funding, right? Make sure that this is something that neighborhood associations do, as opposed to just saying, well, we have this funding and we can continue just generally ignoring it. We don't need to get the funding. You know what? Is that clear? Half-baked idea, but.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I'm curious to hear what others have to say about it. I need to think on it more.
Sarah, if I remember how this is all put together, what it already does is it does put it, because it's based on a whole lot of, it's a pretty complicated model, and it's based on some historical data about how gentrification is in our part of the city versus other parts of the city. And so it comes out with some pretty interesting answers on how things will be reallocated. It does allocate more money to some of those parts of the city that have been underfunded and There's maybe work to do, like specifically some of the north side areas. Interestingly enough, we are at a disadvantage compared to, say, East Harriet, which is, I don't know how we would seem less needy than East Harriet, but so there's just some funny disparities already kind of built into it. Some of them would be exactly, I think, what you would be proposing, that the money goes where it's needed most. But there is a certain need for a base funding to even operate a neighborhood association. So our budget could be cut such that it would be pretty tough to operate. On the other hand, we could raise more money locally. We have maybe more opportunity to do that than some other neighborhoods. But because of the complicated manner of the model that was used to do this, it's a little hard to sort out. And this seems like the easiest way to address just kind of the basic needs of every neighborhood in the city, while recognizing the greater needs that some parts of the city clearly have. I don't know if that helps, Sarah.
Well, it's good to hear that there is maybe some more funding going to neighborhoods that are historically need that assistance. I do agree with David a little bit, where there is money that you need a baseline of money to operate a neighborhood organization, but historically we haven't really shown that some of the neighborhood organizations are making any movement on working on inclusion and working on policies that bring other people who may not look like them to their neighborhoods. So I throw that out there, that I do, as I read it this afternoon, that was some of my thoughts as well. Not that it's something that shouldn't happen, but I think I want to go on record saying that there is a part of me that sees it good to be a way to incentivize neighborhoods to actually make movement on some inclusion policies.
There was a question, Frank threw a question in the chat that says, is there funding through private donation? I guess I can take this one. We are funded through private donation. Part of our funding comes from asks that we have to residents in the neighborhood. And I think this gets back to tying all this stuff together. I think, we have the capacity here as an organization and as a neighborhood to fund our neighborhood organization more through the community that is here. We know that we have more broadly, not acutely to any individual, but have more privilege here in Kingfield in terms of just thinking about income, have a significantly higher incomes, have a significantly higher housing value than the average across the city. And so we know that there is the capacity here in our community to fund our organization if our community values the work that our organization is doing. And that is the role of this board. Like David, this is something that I've been struggling with too, that I think you make a really good point about, is like, how do you fund the aspirational accomplishment, right? Because we maybe could as an organization, as a neighborhood, could do more work than a neighborhood who is getting funded significantly more. But there are two things that I've thought about with that too: the history of neighborhood organizations and how they've been funded and what they've been funded to be, right? Which in the past has been a lot of times, white flight prevention organizations that funds homeowners and funds, through NRP dollars, funds mostly housing, and that's predominantly gone to homeowners. And also just hitting on the point that there are different capacities with the different organizations and really different needs, right? If neighborhood organizations are there to serve the community, there are needs in terms of poverty, in terms of, talking about crime and violence that are happening in a lot of neighborhoods that maybe aren't happening to the level in our neighborhood. And so, thinking about that base level of funding, but it's a really interesting point. And I wish that there was maybe, and I think there is some of this, more of kind of the metric and results driven funding. And I think, but I think that there also could be sources of funding outside of the city that we could ask for, saying, look at all the great work we're doing, foundation. And this is a conversation I've been having with Beacon a little bit, is like, how, there is maybe some outside funding. You just have to like sell the value that you're having. So yeah, that's kind of my perspective on it.
So, and Sarah LR, just because my ignorance, I'm curious. Is it your opinion, given that you have the institutional knowledge, that the 19,000 and some odd dollar baseline would be insufficient for us to operate on a year-to-year basis, and that the 35,000 would be sufficient, or would be closer to sufficient?
35,000. So our budget is close to 100,000 a year.
Okay.
It's double what the city currently provides. So KFNA would have to radically change how it does its work to operate on a budget that small, or radically change the work that I am doing or paid staff is doing to bring in money to have a budget, that we need to operate at the current level. A lot more time would have to be spent on fundraising. And I would say, so I put in the chat, just look at the second one. The first one didn't cut well. The screenshot from the 2020 report shows the change in funding that the city recommended for the program, and it shows a decrease in base support for all neighborhoods as it increases funding for neighborhoods in need, based on an equity rental unit. There were 3 factors that were figured. So basically, the base funding goes down over the course of the 3 years. The collaboration and partnership funding also goes down, and the neighborhoods in need or in higher poverty basically get more money through that program. So I think, to Sarah Cheetah's group's argument, and that someone else, Alice, I think, made this case too, every group needs a basic amount of money to even be an organization that's there to respond to needs. And asking groups to constantly be applying for funding. Generally, when you apply for funding, you're applying for program-specific funding. You're not applying for operational money. So it's a question to the city of, is there a value of having a neighborhood group that's on the ground, responsive to the people, responsive to issues, that's ready to go? Is the city willing to fund that for every neighborhood or not? And yes, in some neighborhoods, some of those dollars may be wasted, but it's really the value of having those feet ready to go in every community, and being the liaison with the city. I think asking neighborhoods to apply, like Kingfield has the capacity to call on volunteers or put a grant proposal together. I think that what we found in some of those, show your worth, prove your worth type of metrics of neighborhood organizing, is we often cut out the neighborhoods that we want to serve the most by saying, oh, and there's a date and you have to apply for these funds, and then you have to account for it, and then you have to like prove what a great job you did. Whereas really, for a lot of these groups, we just need to give them money to do the work. So that's going against your argument, David, about like we should have more money that people can apply for.
Are there any other comments that people want to share? I want to be conscious that it is 8:40 right now, so we're running into a little bit of a time crunch. And if we wanted to I think the big action item is voting on this letter and KFNA's KFNA's name being included on this letter, us endorsing this letter being written. So.
If I can just add, and then I think to address Frank's question too. So the funding that is proposed from the city was ordered to be budget neutral. That was before a pandemic happened. I actually haven't seen what the intent is with these funds going forward, but when I was working 5 years ago on the city task force for a recommendation of this, we were recommending it a $10,000 per year budget for neighborhoods. So I would say I'm in agreement that 4.1 is too small to support 70 organizations. I agree with Sarah's group's analysis that the city is not going to change the intent of the program. The city has gone through a couple different reiterations of what they give funding for, and right now they are going to give funding for equity work, and there is no harm in asking for more money. Will it be well received? I'm doubtful, but that's not a reason to not ask. Especially, I think, in light of and the argument that people want to see money not going to police, providing it to the communities to develop community safety solutions for everybody is like a no-brainer direction for the city to go.
So Sarah put in the chat, I think if everyone wants to throw that in there or throw it up here, the gradient, like your gradient of agreement as we move forward. The one pitch that I would just make for this would be that I have seen advocacy around this issue specifically and advocacy around other issues in the city take an approach that has not been successful, and that is like, I don't want to say burn it down, but it's kind of a like all or nothing sort of approach. Like we need to completely redo the formula, or we need neighborhood organizations need to be funded instead of 4 million, it needs to go to 40 million, right? Kind of like non-starters. I think that this is a really interesting and good compromise and a way to be proactive. And again, from my conversations with Councilmember Jenkins, who has really spearheaded this project, she has always looked to community to provide input on things and practical input on things, and not just say no, but like, here's a different idea and here's a different mechanism, and I think this letter and this broad kind of proposal does that. So that would be my take on it. There was a question from Frank. Sorry, I missed that. She comes from where? I think Frank, maybe you're. Oh, Sarah, you're on mute. If you were trying to talk.
I believe Frank was asking, where does the money come from? So Frank, it's part of the annual city budget.
Yep. And I will just say too, is maybe if people are putting in those, putting in their scores, we have two main buckets of money. We have NRP funding, which we pull from, and then we have more kind of like base fund, CPP funding, which this is more what we're talking about. So, okay. I haven't been following the chat. Sarah, do you want to jump in and summarize?
Yeah, it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4 5s. Does anyone else want to 5 being endorse or sign? 1 would be a veto.
Sarah, there's 5 5s and you and Chris have not voted.
Oh, thank you.
6 5s.
Thanks, BJ.
I'm also curious, Sarah, in your outreach, have you talked to any neighborhood organizations that do not support this letter? And do you have any knowledge of the reasons why they don't support? Either Sarah, really.
Which Sarah?
Yeah.
Either or Chris.
Yeah, I just had a meeting earlier today, a quick check-in with this group, and I asked that very question. And so far, there's not been an organization that they're aware of that's voted no in opposition. I think there's definitely organizations that have not responded to the initial email, just saying like, this letter exists, will you please review it? So whether or not that's an active no, or, well, it's not an active no, a passive no, or don't have the capacity, don't agree, it's hard to say. But as of this morning, there wasn't anyone that had actively voted no.
Okay, so it looks like we have.
Derek, can we vote real quick before? Oh, did Derek leave already? Shoot. Okay. Do we still have quorum?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Right? David?
If I can just answer David's question while we're going. I would say that neighborhoods were tangled for a long time, David, in what Chris was talking about, in just flat out saying what the city was providing was not sufficient. And this letter helps bring it around, you know, to more of like, here's why we request this without fighting why. The city was super unclear on a lot of points. Like they never told people that they wanted it budget neutral, even through the planning phase. I mean, there were many things that they didn't talk about. They never said that they were switching the formula to an equity formula or a rationale for that. So people were confused about, you know, why numbers were jumping all over. They never, there's a lot of things over the last decade that the city's been unclear about in NCR's role, that department serves within the city itself. So I think that neighborhoods were fighting about that as much as the actual proposal that was on the table. But every neighborhood was saying it's not enough money.
Okay. Could maybe, it looks like we're good. Can we have 7, right? So we can take a vote because there's 12 board members. Correct, David?
Sarah, is it half the board members then seating? Because we have 12 members seating, and we have more than half the board members now seat, right? I don't have the bylaws in front of me, but is it half the board members then seating?
It's half who are at the meeting, and so not 12 weren't even at the meeting.
Well, so we had a quorum to start the meeting, but so in order to have a quorum to, let me see, because I don't know what the bylaws say if we've had 2 board members leave, so we definitely had a quorum when we started. Oftentimes when you have a quorum when you start, you don't lose it when people leave. But I don't have the bylaws in front of me.
But there's still a quorum present.
We do still have a quorum present. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take a vote. If for whatever reason we find that that's not the case, then we can take an e-vote after this. So
yeah, sounds good.
I'll just also say, yeah, I'm like a 4.5. I have some frustrations with like some of the information, population not being specifically included in some of the metrics, and also the bluntness of some of the tools around gentrification, which, like Alice pointed out, is the reason why East Harriet receives more funding than us. But those are small concerns, and I think those are more personal concerns. So I guess I would move to approve this letter and have KFNA as a organization sign on to the letter, kind of following what Sarah has outlined in her memo.
I second.
Any discussion or comments, questions about that?
Just in terms of discussion, I would say I really appreciate everyone's review of the document and great questions, great points. There is an opportunity if KFNA wants to write a separate statement touching on some of those things. I think some of the points that I'm hearing go above the intent of this letter. So I think that just for us all to keep in mind that we all, as either individuals or an organization, have until September 30th to submit any other comment to the city that we want to be considered.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, all in favor, thumbs up or yes? Or yay?
Aye.
Opposed and abstentions? Thank you much. We have a past signing on. Cool. We are running up into a board deadline, not a board deadline, a timeline issue. So I will quickly say, I think we're going to skip over, we already talked about this, Sarah, modifications of the CCLT. I think some financial stuff will be discussed at next board meeting. And the one thing is that Scott reached out to me. Scott's leading the Get Out to Vote campaign. There are two really important things that we need, still need volunteers for. We still need, it'd be great if some board members volunteered to be at MLK Park on November 3rd. So I will send out a separate email because there's only 7 of us here now, but please think about that. If you could fill in, a 2-hour slot out at the park during that time, that would be really, really great. I understand that that is complicated with COVID, and we are very, and Scott is very conscious of that, and we've been talking a lot about that. The other thing that Scott is working on, which I think is an awesome idea, is he's calling it a super voucher, but people who move into the neighborhood who are new or don't have like that proof of residency need someone in the neighborhood to vouch for them. My understanding of it is he is not asking anyone to be in the park, but that your phone number would be there. If someone comes out and says, hey, I couldn't vote because I couldn't this, you're going to get a call from one of the people who is at our tent and asked to assist in vouching for that person by going and maybe meeting them with their house, talking with them, and then going and vouching for them. They need specifically for someone in 8-6, which is north of 40th. So 40th to 36th, if that makes sense. So if you're interested in that, that's another opportunity to participate. And I would say either reach out to me or Sarah, or if you have Scott's information directly. So that's all I had from that. We have 7 minutes left. Can we do a quick, unless there's, sorry, I shouldn't jump ahead that quickly. Are there any questions on Get Out to Vote stuff or those two opportunities?
I do want to say thanks to David and Alice for stepping up for the board, for being engaged in that work. So, and Alice was on the street for the kickoff event yesterday. Thanks for being there, Alice.
It was fun.
It was super fun.
It was super fun. It was quick too, actually.
Yeah. So we had 26 volunteers staging the signs down Nicollet Avenue, which will go out into yards next week. And then as a separate thing, David and Alice, I think you were copied on the email today, but we might need other people. We're trying to figure out how to make sure, if needed, we can vouch for the residents living in MLK Park, for those that want to vote. So we're working on that with Sarah and Raquel to verify who's been living there, to see if we need to get them registered now, how that would work, or do we register them the day of?
And are we doing anything with the census at present?
At present, we are not. So we wrapped up 5 weeks of work with the Sagrado de Corazon grocery distributions. And then we were asked, we can still do outreach. We just can't do direct outreach while the enumerators are on the streets. so it's more event based. So I would say at this point we have no census worked planned, other than when we do get out the vote, we can ask people if they did the census and just get them on the online form and have them do that directly. If there are events that you're at where you expect a bunch of people elsewhere in the city, I'm happy to talk to anyone about how to do census collection. Our numbers are still really low, actually. Not in Kingfield, but in the city.
Oh,
Didn't I just read we're at 72.8% of the 2010 census?
It's low.
wow. That's low.
I looked at the map 2 weeks ago maybe, and the U of M neighborhood, and I think near North we're still at like 30%.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Any other questions? Sarah, did you have a comment? I saw you take your mute off. You good? Any other comments on get out the vote or census stuff? Okay, we have 4 minutes left. Can we do updates from everybody? One thing that you're seeing, that's happening, that you're excited about, that you're concerned about. You're gonna have to do it in less than a minute, 20 seconds. So Sarah, sorry, you're first on the list again. Reverse the alphabetical order.
Huge shout out to Becky for the 38th Street Bridgel. I told Becky that I'm going to be her cold weather, early darkness gal. I had the opportunity to quickly stop by there yesterday. I was having a horrible day, and then I got there and saw neighbors that care and heard horns honking, and it turned around my day. So thanks, Becky.
BJ?
Keeping on the city council for getting a sharps container in the park still hasn't happened. I'm still not getting responses. They said they were going to do it last week, but we are keeping on it.
Mike's not here. Mike, David. David Robbins.
Well, I'll just say it was a great meeting, and thanks for everyone, and thanks Sarah for spending time out of your personal life to work on that neighborhood stuff. Very interesting, both Sarahs. And winter sucks.
Yeah.
Alice.
We're working on other get out the vote things too in our little area. We're getting postcards to send to people in other states to remind them to vote and get their ballot early.
Chris.
I just started Zoom University again this week, and this semester I'm taking a neighborhood revitalization class, which I'm super excited about. So yeah, I'm gonna learn a lot about systemic racism and how it affects our neighborhoods.
Great.
I'm going to use my time to ask you a question, Chris. Is Hope Community still teaching that? Awesome, cool. That's really good. Yeah, they're amazing, and we should use them as a resource too, because they do unbelievable work, both in terms of like the community and engagement specifically. I will say we're still waiting. My one update: we're still waiting on Southwest Parks Master Plan from the Park Board to be published, but it's looking like it's going to be next month. So I will have asks for that. But if you see that come across, or you have any really specific interest in changes to the parks, please let me know. Becky.
Yeah, we've just been at the bridge every Tuesday. Our numbers were a little smaller last Tuesday. I think the cold weather is going to be tough, but we've had up to 25 people there, and people bringing their little kids, and it is really fun. I mean, it's very oddly uplifting to hear that many horns honk and get the support that you get, especially from people who are actually crossing the 38th Street Bridge. So come up on Tuesdays if you can and join us. It's fun.
Awesome, thank you. Frank, are you available? We normally just kind of do like quick updates or things that you're interested, excited about in the neighborhood. Anything you wanted to share at the end of the meeting?
I'll just say that this has been my my first attempt, so thank you for letting me join. I'm really impressed on the organization as a whole, just watching and knowing that there's some really strong minds and strong wills behind the neighborhood association. So that's definitely a plus, and I appreciate that. And thanks for letting me sit in. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Sarah, you want to close us out?
You bet. Two cool things. One is we have a super fun one-page handout that will be coming out tomorrow. That's everything you need to know how to vote. That was put together with some hard work by a couple of volunteers over the last week. And then free yoga by One Yoga is starting in MLK Park and will continue through October.
Awesome. Well, it's 9:01, so I will say thank you, everybody. Good meeting. Please look for the meeting minutes and meeting notes, and especially kind of moving forward on these conversations around community safety. So thanks again, everybody.
Yep, and just real quick, I posted my email. If anyone wants to reach out to me, feel free. You know, and I'm at the 3700 block of First Avenue, so feel free to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank, and thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your contribution.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good
Bye.
night.
Bye, everybody.